It's my great pleasure to meet you online. I think COVID-19 has changed the world. Fortunately, modern technology can enable us to continue our academic discussions like this conference. Please allow me to briefly introduce the Shanghai Academy of Global Governance and Area Studies, namely SAGGAS, at Shanghai International Studies University. Founded in September 2018, it has received strong support from the Ministry of Education of China and the Shanghai municipal government. The goal of SAGGAS is quite clear. We hope to promote theory building and practical research of the target country or region which you are interested in on this platform. The top priority of the research fields we are engaged in are European studies and the Slavic Eurasian studies programs. We propose an exciting concept like Eurasia. But I want to remind you that the four letters of Eura, E-U-R-A, are capital letters. It refers to a wider and a greater Eurasian region, including the traditional Russian-led Eurasia, the former Soviet republics, and also the European Union and Central Asia, East Asia, West Asia, and South Asia. So in this sense, Africa has entered our also research vision. Today's online speaker, Dr. Cgtn, an excellent expert on China-African relations, is a newcomer who just joined us this year. We also keep close contact with many outstanding Chinese scholars engaged in African studies, such as Professor Liu Hongzhong from Zhejiang Normal University, Professor Zhang Chun of Yunnan University, also Professor Li Xiaoyun of China Agricultural University. I think you are very familiar with all of these names. SAGGAS supports an innovative collaboration system to break the boundaries of universities, disciplines, and learning, and establish a more objective area studies approach. Global vision, regional focus, and local care is the core concept of SAGGAS. All researchers and students joining in the program need to be proficient in multilingualism. So the project attaches importance to the extraordinary value of anthropology, history, and geography methods and knowledge for area studies. With the introduction of multiple perspectives, we believe that our scholars can avoid being affected by West-centrism, Oriental-centrism, or egocentrism, and will not only obtain one-sided profundity in knowledge production. SAGGAS also supports and encourages researchers and the students to conduct long-term fieldwork. I think it's quite important in African studies. In the target country or region, receive first-hand information and materials, use multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary theories and research methods on this basis to produce reliable area studies knowledge. SAGGAS also enjoys a global scholar network, including the University of Cambridge, University of Tokyo, Uppsala University in Sweden, the Russian Academy of Science, and so on. We want to maximize the advantages of international scholars through various methods such as giving lectures, paper, or dissertation, or fieldwork supervision, and joint research to cultivate a new generation of talents with excellent language skills, outstanding disciplinary understanding, and in-depth areas studies knowledge. As for China-Africa cooperation, there have been rich discussions in academic cycles at home and abroad, but most focus on hard cooperation fields such as politics, military, security issues. Even based on my limited knowledge and experience as a diplomat, former diplomat, soft cooperation, education, culture, media, and so on plays an increasingly important role in Africa-China interactions. Therefore, the topic of our online conference is promising, I think. I believe that your speech and discussions will be very insightful and helpful. Last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Wang Duanyong and Professor Joshua Eisenman for their outstanding contributions as coordinators of this conference. I also want to invite experts and scholars online to cooperate more with SAGGAS, Shanghai Academy of Global Governance and Area Studies, and look forward to achieving good results. I will stop here. Thank you so much for being so attentive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Yang, for your excellent opening remarks. I congratulate you on your school's important work to advance international knowledge and research. It is an honor to join you and share mutual enthusiasm for this important conference entitled China's Soft Cooperation with Africa. Thank you especially to the conference's organizers, Professor Duanyong Wang and Professor Joshua Eisenman. I'm Jonathan Noble and serve as the university's Senior Assistant Provost for Internationalization. In this role, I promote for the university as a whole international research collaboration, global education, and global scholarship. At the University of Notre Dame, we have two very important global infrastructures. One is the Keough School for Global Affairs. Joshua Eisenman is a professor in the Keough School for Global Affairs, and Notre Dame International, which is under the provost office and promotes broadly the university's international engagement. Our work is meaningless without the dedicated work of scholars like yourselves, who are passionate about advancing global scholarship, learning from each other, sharing different perspectives, viewpoints, and experiences. And I believe ultimately trying to better ourselves, each other, and humanity. At Notre Dame, we often note the importance of connecting our scholarship, our work, to the goals of advancing human flourishing. Of course, this sounds somewhat grandiose, unless we are truly each making contributions in a selfless way to a larger mission that extends beyond our immediate domains. I would argue that how we care for one another is just as important as how we conduct our research, make our arguments, and advance scholarship. That is, we aspire to generate a scholarship founded on care and concern for each other and founded on a culture of civility and ultimately humility, as we realize the limits of our own knowledge, the minusculity of our time on this planet. However, let us not underestimate our collective contributions and potential, nor overestimate our singular viewpoints in search of verification. We are entering this discussion during troubled times. Humans have wreaked havoc on a planet that will soon require life support. All sorts of climate disasters are poised to accelerate and destabilize the world as we have known it. We must understand the increasing urgency that will impact future generations. This conference, I believe, engages with this urgency to accelerate our common commitment to promoting a culture of mutual understanding and flourishing. Your research focuses on issues that impact a significant fraction of humanity, examines opportunities for cooperation and exchange, dives into rapidly changing geopolitical landscapes that can potentially affect many people. You have formed a community of concerned scholars from Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. Although we are missing the convivial spirit of in-person dialogue and discussion through this format, this virtual modality, I have estimated that we have avoided the emission of about 60 metric tons of carbon dioxide. Now, I had to check the MIT climate portal to get a handle on this. How much is a metric ton? So imagine a cube 27 feet tall, wide, and long. which is basically a reference point for us here is the height of a telephone pole. That's how much space it would take to hold a metric ton of carbon dioxide. In this way, although the pandemic has been devastating, it is also a type of wake-up call to become better stewards of our shared planet. And through this shared virtual format, we can cherish our global community while also playing a small part in reducing carbon emission. Once again, I'd like to congratulate all of the panelists for your participation and express gratitude, especially to Shanghai International Studies University for their vision and partnership in this conference, and express my sincere thanks to my colleagues who have worked so hard to enable this event. Thank you in particular to Mr. Reagan Lee from the Beijing Global Gateway, Ms. Jingyu Wang, Executive Director of the Beijing Global Gateway, and my colleagues at Notre Dame International, Catherine Wilson and Ali Richthammer, for their expert administration of this conference. We also warmly welcome the conference's attendees and encourage you to participate through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I wish this conference extraordinary success. Now I'm delighted to cede the floor to the conference's co-key organizer from the University of Notre Dame, Josh Eisenman, who will introduce the first session and frame and provide framing remarks for the conference. For the conference presenters, please don't hesitate to use the chat feature to communicate with Reagan or Ali for any questions or issues. Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan and Dean Yang, for your excellent comments. It's a pleasure to jointly host this conference. And I was going to thank all the people that Jonathan thanked. So rather than re-thank them, I will just reiterate and tag along because there's just been excellent work on both sides, both at SISU and at Notre Dame in coordinating this conference. I think that we are really making the most of this platform. And I know both speakers have already said that, but I mean, just to give you guys a sense of, we've got people at this conference from Congo, Kenya, Cairo, Beijing, Pakistan, London, and of course Notre Dame, and so we're able to really squeeze the most out of the Zoom platform, and I'm grateful for the administration of the platform today. Today is also a great step in my relationship with SISU. I've been working with Professor Wang Duanyong for over 10 years on various projects having to do as broadly as Chinese agriculture to China-Africa relations, and he's an excellent friend and an excellent colleague, and I'm thrilled to hear his remarks here today, and I'm thrilled to work with him. Before we get started with our first panel, which is very exciting, I want to just provide a few remarks to kind of frame our discussion here today. This won't probably be more than about 5 minutes, but just to kind of give us a conception of what we're talking about. In the political science discussion and in the international relations discussion, there's quite a bit of talk about the concept of soft power. Sometimes in Washington, they're talking about China's sharp power. But I think that what China is doing is different. It's not soft power in the typical sense of, the NBA or Manchester United or even hip hop music. It's mostly often driven from above, driven from the party state. And so it's a different conception of soft power. And that's why in the title, we talked about soft in quotation marks and cooperation. And so I just want to lay out a couple of the parameters of how I see this concept. And of course, others in the conference are free to disagree or challenge any of the remarks that I make here. But this is just some of the ways that I conceive of this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint here. And hopefully, if I can get it to work. There we go. And pardon me, play from the start. So I'm assuming that you guys can all see that, and somebody will let me know if you cannot. This is the cover of the book that Professor Wang and I just put out. Thrilled to work with him on this project, and very grateful for SISU's support. Oh. So to understand China's relations with Africa, I think we have to understand that this is occurring under times of growing asymmetry in the relationship. I mean, if we look at the number of African countries with per capita GDP above China, we can go back to about 1988, 89. We see 35 African countries with a higher GDP but per capita. But you can see since then, China has, in terms of the population per capita income, has risen dramatically, such that today you have less than 5. And so just to kind of frame our discussion from the highest levels, this discussion takes place at a time when China has grown increasingly powerful vis-a-vis African countries, vis-a-vis almost all African countries. And I think this is an interesting kind of background and backdrop to understand this phenomenon. I also want to place this phenomenon within what I call the interlocking latticework of China-Africa relations, because China-Africa relations takes place on what I would consider 4 distinct levels. It takes place at the global level, the regional level, and the sub-regional level, which is unique to Africa. From what I understand, China only engages these sub-regional organizations like ECOWAS, SADC, COMESA, and other African sub-regional organizations. This doesn't happen in other regions like, say, Latin America, but in Africa, it's unique. And then today, we'll be talking primarily at the bilateral level. This is China's relations with other nation states or within other nation states. And so you can see I've listed a variety of different elements that take place: the state to state, the party to party, military to military, and the propaganda relationship, which we're primarily talking about today. And so you can get a sense that what we're talking about is narrow in terms of it's within this scope of the bilateral elements of the relationship. Now, I think that Professor Qin Cheng at China Foreign Affairs University helps us to understand what China's objectives are here. He talks about in his book, The Relational Theory of Politics, he talks about relational power. And if you'll pardon me, just to read this quote, I think it helps us to understand what's going on here. He says that relational power is the ability to change the attitude, motivation, or behavior of others, and thus make them conform to one's will during the process of social interaction. It's a process of constantly manipulating and managing one's relational circles to one's advantage. An actor is more powerful because she has larger relational circles, more intimate and more important others in these circles, and more social prestige because of these circles. It is not the relational circles themselves, but the manipulation of such circles that makes her more able to influence others. And so I would argue that it is through China's soft engagement that it builds its relational power in Africa. And it does this throughout the world, but today we're talking about Africa. And so this relational power is then becoming an important asset for China in terms of pursuing its national interests and goals. The topic of our first panel being the geopolitical framing of this question. And I would say that this helps us to understand a little bit about what's going on here. Now, if we think about what is happening on interpersonal level, we can think about the idea of creating a friendly environment. And when negotiations take place under circumstances characterized by friendly relations and cooperative motivational orientations, these conditions predominate over the power structures, produce results under symmetry and asymmetry. So even as China's relations with African countries have become more and more asymmetric, as we saw from the data in the first slide, these engagements, these friendly engagements, allow for China to kind of set aside the questions that emerge from this deep asymmetry and engage with African countries under these friendly relations and motivational orientations. Now, here are some examples of this kind of soft engagement, which I call, or which in China you would call 对非宣传. And so it takes place on a variety of different levels we'll be talking about here today. You've got cultural engagements, you've got educational engagements, media engagements, and even increasingly health-focused engagements. You have young leaders engagements, you have women's engagements, you have Portuguese-speaking engagements. So you have a variety of different types and ways that that China is engaging in a soft way with Africans through, even as you can see here, former Portuguese colonies. So even writing on the back of the colonial experience, right, to bring together the Chinese and Africans in this soft fashion. Most recently, we've seen China engage in health diplomacy. And I'm sure folks will mention this. I just want to put it out there, but you can see how many African countries here, and this is only as of April, had received vaccines from China for COVID-19. So you can get a sense of that health is now becoming an element of this soft engagement. Folks will be talking. We'll have a whole panel on media engagement. But these are images from the Forum on China-Africa Media Cooperation. So you can see this has been going on for a while, and it's now tethered to the China-Africa Cooperation Forum, which is another venue for engagement, although on a more official level. And so this media training is also taking place. I believe Iman Farhai is going to talk a little bit about training exercises in this panel. I'm excited to hear her views. Although maybe not media training, but this gives you a sense of what these trainings might look like. And then in terms of African students studying in China, this graph in 2018, China stopped reporting the data, but you can see how important African students are over the last decade. They've risen from less than 10,000 students to over 80,000. And as a percentage of foreign students, they've gone up from basically irrelevant in 2003 and before when I studied in China to now, or in 2018, they're about 18%. And of course, one major question that looms over this discussion, and I really hope we get into, is what is the effect of COVID-19 on the long term in China's ability to bring these students back to China in a healthy fashion? Because this is a concern you see on social media. Many African students would like to get back to their studies, understandably. And so this is a question I hope we can talk a little bit about, the kind of long-term effects of COVID-19 on the soft cooperation, which is so interpersonal in its nature. And so just to summarize quickly what I was saying, the China soft cooperation with Africa arose at a time of great asymmetry in the China-Africa relationship. I believe it helps to understand Professor Chin's version, understanding of relational power, and how China seeks to expand its network with African elites. And this includes expanding the depth and breadth of its Africa-focused propaganda work and political host diplomacy training, etc., on a variety of different ways. And this list can go on and on. There should be an etc. at the end here, because China's a soft engagement can have almost unlimited modalities depending on what would be salient at the time. So why don't I leave it there? That is how I see this, the kind of framing of what we're talking about today. But of course, others may see it very differently. So with that kind of backdrop, then, let me go ahead and turn immediately to our first speaker. Our first panel is going to include Professor Zheng Yu of Fudan University, Iman Farhai in Egypt, and Professor Van Noort from Britain. And we're going to begin with Professor Zheng Yu, who is as I said, a professor at Fudan University, a School of International and Public Relations. He earned his PhD from UC San Diego, and as a UCLA graduate, I won't hold it against him. We're thrilled to have him here and joining us from Shanghai. So Professor Yu, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Josh. And first of all, I would like to thank Notre Dame and Shanghai International Studies University to co-organize this wonderful panels, and also the event, especially to both Dean Yang and also to Professor Noble for giving this opening remarks, and for Josh and Duanyong to actually organize this panel. So it's a great honor to be part of this panel. I think I heard what Josh was talking about, the soft. When I was actually Duanyong was reaching me to talk about this, the soft cooperation between China and Africa. I was a little bit confused. I thought this is not in my area, because I'm a political economy person, right? I study trade, aid, and foreign direct investments, but I didn't actually really study this kind of like a soft part of this, the connection. So I give some thought about what the soft really mean. So let me actually share my screen so I can just give some just a very brief introduction about this evolution of the China-Africa cooperation. So I think as we're all of us here, I think knows about the history of the China-Africa engagements, which I think it started in the 1963. Well, when the Premier Zhou and I was first visited, the tour of Africa, which is popularly known as Zhou's Safari. Undertake this between December 1963 to February 1964. So during the time, so China and Africa had a very limited, economic, interactions. The total trade volume was only about, $40 million. And also there's an article was published at that time said that in China's present thin cabbage soup era, such trade and aid are economic luxuries indulged in one of the political necessity. So they are in the nature of political insurance for the future. So you see, I think from the very beginning, we see this China and Africa relations was actually being driven by this strong political wills that is, both the China and Africa was share this, the strong identity as, the third world, and as this kind of like brothers of the, in the third world. So, but then I think this relationship has involved, since, then, and today, especially I think it's after, at the beginning of the 21st century. So today we actually see that China-Africa was, the relations was fundamentally different, right? Because today we think China is Africa's largest trading partners, which I think for more than decades. So that's the China, I think, is also it's the number 4. FDI stocks in Africa's fastest growing FDI to African continent, and in infrastructure finance, China actually tops, the list, and also in terms of the aid, China is now the third largest, donors to Africa. And I think it's all this kind of figures just shows that, China's and Africa's, connections has been growing dramatically over the last 2 decades. So during this time, Africa has undergone this unprecedented, high growth for almost 2 decades. So now I think it's this continent today was because this, the lines on the move. So I think this has been quite, there's a bright future for this, when we actually talk about Africa today. So I think this kind of relationship underneath this kind of rapid growth of this economic interactions between China and Africa is actually this involving and sustaining China and African cooperative relationship. So I think there's 2 parts of this kind of cooperation. One is this continuity. Another one is the change part. I think it's on this continuity part, China still positions itself as uniquely situated to help Africa on the basis of the equality, mutual benefits, and non-interference. So I think that's the and also I think it's this is sort of like you could call it the China's principle of engage with Africa, but also this kind of engagement has some long-lasting legacies. So our own studies, my study with my colleagues, Pippa Morgan, who's actually found that there's this kind of connections that have really worked to bring to transform this China's influence in the Africa into this some the soft influence into this the real investments, right? We see this kind of historical age has lasting legacies in China-Africa cooperation. We see this China. This one was actually showing that China and Africa's on the left side of this one was actually see this Chinese aid projects in the past, and this one is actually Chinese investment today. So we actually see there's a quite high correlation between this historical aid and contemporary investments. And we think this is actually well, of course, it was kind of Chinese investment in this 21st century was driven much by this, the government's efforts to go abroad, and also to, also part of by the Belt and Road Initiative. But we argue this is also has lots to do with these connections, which has social capitals China has been built since the early times, that through this kind of aid project. So that's why we see this linkage between this historical aid and the contemporary investment in China, which is, I think, is evidence that all those kind of soft connections really worked to actually turn that into a real, economic benefits for both African and China. So I think this another part of this, the relationship, or I think this is about the changing parts, So that on this part, I think that's the China-African Cooperation Forum, which was started in 2000 and has provided somewhat as novel, framework and a platform for this bilateral and multilateral cooperation. I think it's Josh has give us the some of these examples of this engagement through this kind of the women engagement, health engagement, media, and political party and culture engagements, all through this kind of different platforms set up by this China-African Cooperation Forum. But on the other hand, parts of this change is actually we do see there's emergence of this new model of the development cooperation, which has been characterized by investment, infrastructure, and industrialization, which I think is we can see this, so like we call this kind of model is a 3I model, which I think it's different from how China engaged with the traditional approach of China engaged with Africa. We see it actually has investment, infrastructure, and industrialization. So those kind of like a model, which were primarily was kind of like it's the kind of like a come from China's own development experience, domestic experience. So this is sort of like when China was engaged with the Africa. So this is kind of like China was sharing this knowledge of this economic development with Africa. So that's why we see this kind of emergence of this the economic development cooperation. So as also I think it's the Josh mentioned about this part of this this inevitable consequence of this intriguing this relationship between China and African countries is this intensified this people-to-people engagement. So notable areas of such interactions is we can see in the education. So the recent data from the China's Ministry of the Education indicates that the number of the African students now study in China is only second to the students from other Asian countries. Myself actually has been supervised quite a few African PhD students, and Cliff here I think is also was in my PhD seminar. So I think I'm so happy to actually see this kind of like this is a sort of like we see this kind of like the examples of the soft engagement. So just as a comparison, I think you see this number of African students who actually study in China has grown at a pace nearly 9 times that of the African students study in the United States. So this we do see this kind of very high rapid growth of the education engagements. So I think I'm just of course I'm just talk about this a little bit about the China and Africa in the future. So especially we're living in the age of this under the shadow of this COVID-19, which was still having a big impacts on this the engagement. So as COVID spreads across the world, it's actually has exposed us a range of this both vulnerability and opportunities that the African countries have in their relationship with China. So this is a recent studies by this UNDP shows that this pandemic is likely to accelerate the shift of interdependence of Africa to China and away from Europe, the US and India. So we can see this kind of prediction that, the growth of the bilateral trade between Africa and China will continue to grow, while, the Africans trade with, the US, United States, EU, and India was actually will decline in terms of relatively in terms of their share of this African total trade. So all those kind of things shows that we do see this more interactions between Africa and China will be took place in the future. So just to conclude that, my brief presentation, that Africans' development aspiration call for the substantial financial resources, new knowledge, and global market access. So this China-African relationship has deepened over time, but it still needs to be strengthened for this, well, we call this, the term is shared prosperity. I think this is sort of like a quite, popular terms in China today. So for China, Africa just offers a great opportunity to support the Belt and Road Initiative. But for Africa, China offers this potential as a partner in its infrastructure rollout and industrial development. But I think is the bonding, the connections between those kind of great, economic opportunities underneath this, the opportunities is the bonding through the soft engagement through the people-to-people, engagement. So let me just stop here. I think it's, I think it's my presentation was not exactly responded to, Josh's, framing, but I think I'll be happy to kind of like, do more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor Zheng Yu. That was fantastic. I really appreciate how you covered so much ground in such a short period of time. So let's, we'll have plenty of questions for you during the Q&A, but I want to shift right now to Professor Carolyn Van Noort, a lecturer of politics and public policy at the University of West of Scotland. She received her PhD in politics from the University of Otago, New Zealand, and she has just put out her first book, Infrastructure, Communication in International Relations, examining how the rise of powers communicate about infrastructure internationally. And she explains the communication practices of different states. So we're really happy to have her here. She's been recovering from a cold, so we're thankful that she's feeling better. And why don't I just turn the floor right over to you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And obviously I also like to thank University of Notre Dame and Shanghai International Affairs University for organizing this conference. Let me share my presentation with you. Oh. So for today's presentation, I'd like to talk about my second book that just got published, titled China's Communication of the Belt and Road Initiative, Silk Road and Infrastructure Initiative Narratives. This book has been published by Routledge and is part of the Routledge series on the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, as Josh already mentioned, this book is a follow-up from my other book that was published only at the beginning of this year, titled Infrastructure, Communication and International Relations. And I put it up here on the slide because here I argue in that first book that communication and infrastructure matters in international relations, because it explains quite a lot on by analyzing its communication. We get a good idea on how a country, an actor, a government wants to be seen internationally, and how these infrastructure projects and financing should be understood. Now, following that, I looked at the biggest infrastructure power and the most known infrastructure initiative of the 21st century, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, when we look at the Belt and Road communication, there are two images that pop up. Now, first, you have images of the infrastructure itself. Here I have an image of the China-Maldives Friendship Bridge. On the other hand, we see images of the Silk Road, given that China is associating the Belt and Road with this idea of the Silk Road, and that it's reviving this period, this idea, this time. And so when looking at these two images, I asked myself in my book, how does China narrate about infrastructure to create a shared meaning about Belt and Road infrastructure projects? And second, how does China apply representations of the past to revive the Silk Road? I conducted visual and qualitative narrative analysis of media productions by Cgtn and Xinhua News on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook in 2018 and 2019. Now, following from that, I broadly argued in my book that China communicates infrastructure narratives to advance its international image as infrastructure and standard-setting power. So infrastructure power is the ability of the state to develop infrastructure or logistical decisions, and standard-setting power is the ability of a state to set international technical standards, which is quite important given China's mission to become a global technological leader. Now, second, the communication of Silk Road narratives is utilized to conjure up a historical continuation of friendly and cooperative relations and to forge China's identity as a good neighbor, good friend, and good partner. Now, in my book, I move on from arguments that China's communication is propaganda or spin or misinformation. Perhaps that argument works for others or it helps a lot. But for me, in my book, I try to explore and analyze China's media in lots of detail. And I try to understand how China tries to create a shared meaning of its BRI projects and its bilateral relations. To do so, my theoretical framework in my book draws from international political communication, science and technology studies, which have great literature on infrastructure itself, area studies, given that the case studies that I look at is from Kenya, which I'll talk about a bit more in a second, as well as Kyrgyzstan and the Maldives, and engages with obviously numerous historical books and literature about the Silk Road. Now, in my book, I conceptualize infrastructure narratives in quite a lot of detail. And so I understand infrastructure narratives as being built and shaped by different modalities. You see in the left column, spatial, temporal, political, economic, technological, and perceptual. Now, when we look at that in the Belt and Road communication, if we look at the second column, in a spatial sense, China emphasizes in its infrastructure narratives regional connectivity and economic corridors. Now, on the other hand, in counter narratives or counter arguments that we've seen pop up in media, you see in a spatial sense arguments about land grabbing and expansion. In a temporal sense, China emphasizes that its infrastructure is responsive to contemporary needs and that it's future-oriented. And on the other hand, we see how projects are disrupted, postponed, abandoned. Politically, it's about inclusivity, demand-driven. And on the other hand, we see questions raised about that its infrastructure projects can be a harm on sovereignty and uncheck Chinese influence. Economically, BRI projects are associated with a promise of increased trade and logistical capacity, and on the other hand, underperformance in debt. Technologically speaking, we see emphasis on modernization and high standards, which makes sense given that China wants to be seen as a standard-setting power. And on the other hand, there's this complaints about that it's an insufficient links with other infrastructures and corporate espionage. And perceptually, China uses a lot of positive user experiences, either by elites or users that regularly use the train. And on the other hand, we see local fears and suspicion. Now, these are not the only comments or how infrastructure narratives are shaped, but this is just to give you an idea how I conceptualize infrastructure narratives and how I analyze China's state media internationally. Now, this is some screenshots that I've analyzed for the chapter on Kenya, specifically the Standard Gauge Railway, which I think most of you know is a very prominent Belt and Road project, a railway between the port of Mombasa to the capital city, and then it moves onward towards neighboring countries. Now, these are some screenshots from Cgtn Africa, a video that was disseminated on YouTube. Now, this is how China wants you to see and perceive the SGR. And you see various images. Now, on the first image left on the top, we see images where we see this modern landscape, but also the old railway. So the old and the new is contrasted. We see this on the right on the top, this very modern railway station. We see on the left bottom, this smooth railway that crosses the national parks. And on the bottom, we see how a Chinese man is instructing a young African lady, a Kenyan lady. And so this is a lot about communicating capacity sharing. So when we looked at that, I explained how China's communication combines this infrastructure narrative that uses all these different modalities. So in the spatial sense, it's about solving traffic congestion, enhancing regional connectivity, and that its infrastructure is in harmony with the environment. Temporally, it's about its infrastructure is fast and reliable mode of transport, and that the railway is an improvement of the past. Politically speaking, China is being presented as a genuine partner to Kenya. Economic, it's about a positive impact on Kenya's trade and anticipating increased cargo trains, as well as the profitability of the SGR. Technologically, it's about replacing colonial infrastructure with innovative infrastructure and capacity building. And perceptually, there's a lot of testimonials used by local train users that talk about the convenience and affordability of the SGR. So this is how China tries to communicate, and this is how I interpret the projection of its various media. Now, in my book, in my chapter specifically on this Belt and Road project, I critically analyzed that in light of the various tensions and issues that have been raised in terms of counter narratives and counter arguments, and that kind of undermine these various components. Now, the second part, as I said, there's two dimensions, infrastructure narratives and Silk Road narratives, that I explain in my book, is the Silk Road narratives. So conceptually, I explain Silk Road narratives as a selective representations, specifically of the past. Now, part is Silk Road nostalgia. So there's this sentiment that, as I explained in the second column, where China says there's this longing for the Silk Road, and that Silk Road is associated with very positive qualities and ideas such as peace, trade, friendship, and connectivity. And to do so, China uses mainly representations from the Han Tang and early Ming dynasties, but it uses also some other dynasties, if that makes sense. What is ignored in that sense is a lot of raiding, war, and conflict. It's not like the whole Silk Road time was all that great, but they emphasize the positive. Silk Road narratives also consist of people mobility. So China emphasizes various individuals as well as groups such as diplomats or envoys to explain how back in the past, back in the time, there was a lot of connectivity, and they use various individuals that make sense for the regional or country-specific context. And again, what is ignored is details that complicate a smooth travel, including natural and human hazards, as well as some other reasons for travel that were not necessarily only peaceful. Silk Road narratives also combine as landscapes, so we see caravans across the desert, Shanghai's treasure fleet at sea, as well as maps with east-west corridors. Again, a lot of things are being missed here. It's a simplification, or I suppose romanticization of the past. Now, and the Silk Road narratives also uses a lot, builds on these exchanges, uses emphasis on culture, trade, technology, and obviously this is a very broad section. And again, any negative aspects or impacts related to this exchange is being ignored. Now, when we look back at Kenya, specifically, I looked at some videos that specifically that celebrated this 55 years diplomatic relations between China and Kenya that was disseminated on Cgtn Africa. And here we see images of the treasure fleet, how of Shanghai, and of a giraffe that was given as a diplomatic present. And again, this is what China wants to show you. And again, here I unpack this, saying, okay, well, here we see a selective representation of the early Ming dynasty, people mobility and exchanges. But it obviously, we could question, so what? So what? This happened 600 years ago. And it also, I explain in my book more detail. Well, was it, because there's a lot of literary debates, to what extent was this only peaceful, or was this to foster this idea of a China-centric world order? Now, in terms of these China's communication, the narratives have an aesthetic function. They beautify what are otherwise perhaps boring projects. I explain how these aesthetically pleasing productions are in many ways over pristine. They silence many contentious issues that negatively affect elevated economic partnerships, and this makes these productions, or these media productions, aesthetically vulnerable. Now, this is not to attack or anyways China or its infrastructure projects. International infrastructure projects often come with many issues given in international tensions, and but I specifically look at China, so this is what I wanted to raise. So I've specifically looked at the projection, obviously, studies of reception and audience analysis, which I've seen in another panel, are not included in this book because it's been written last year during the pandemic. And so they are not included, but when it comes to audiences, YouTube or not necessarily, or in much use necessarily in Kenya itself. So audience is also perhaps more broader given the language as in English and place of dissemination. So I would say it's also China uses these videos as well to disseminate to American and European audiences to explain what they're doing and what these projects mean. Just wanted to mention, I have been writing quite a lot on the BRI. Happy to share more about that in the comments later. And I hope I was within my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Van Oort. That it's very impressive, the amount of scholarship you're putting together here. When I saw 2021, I couldn't imagine you'd put out 2 books in the same year. So congratulations and thank you so much for that extremely informative presentation. I've got a question for you, but I'm going to hold it because now we have one of the panelists I've been looking forward to the most, Iman Farhai from Egypt. Iman is just received her PhD from the prestigious University of Cairo in political science. She has over 12 years of experience managing projects funded by Chinese official development assistance in Egypt. And she has been involved personally in managing and customizing some of the courses of China's training exercises in Egypt and other developing countries. So she's really an excellent person to have join us, and I'm thrilled to pass the mic to Dr. Farhai.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you to Notre Dame University and Shanghai Academy of Global Governance. My very humble contribution will be on mainly 2 topics or 2 issues. The first one is about the training programs that China offers developing countries as a main tool to enhance and promote China's soft power in Africa. While the second topic will be shedding some light on the future of the people-to-people grant strategy of China in the light of the current hurdles and challenges that the Chinese Communist Party is facing, not only globally, but most importantly, internally. So I'll go with the first topic, which is the training program that China offers to developing countries with a special focus on Africa. To whom of you who do not know that China has an annual training program that is directed to developing countries, especially African countries. It's done on an annual basis, and it targets government officials and African governments. And the cost of the whole program, the air-round flight tickets and the accommodation and even the allowance there in China is all bared by the Chinese government. So the African countries literally pay almost nothing when it comes to these training courses. I have a small statistic just to share with you from the period between 2016 and 2020. There was more than 1,000 trainings between Egypt and China, and more than 4,000 Egyptian officials have benefited from these trainings. That's quite a number, right? Because in each training you have 3 to 4 candidates from each country. So basically the trainings cover almost all fields: international cooperation, industry, IT, power, electricity, agriculture, whatever you think about, name it, and it will be there. So the key words that always pop up in my mind whenever we say training course that is offered by China to African countries or to developing countries in general is promotion, value promotion, model of development promotion, promoting their side of story. Of course, the trainings have academic content. You'll be sitting in a lecture hall or lecture room, and there will be professors who are giving you information about the Chinese model of development and how the Chinese Communist Party plays the most essential and vital role in this development module. They do not tell you, of course, in this rooms that this is the best module ever, and that when you go back home you have to implement it right away. No, of course not. That it doesn't go that way. But when you are in the lecture room and you hear about the amazing figures of how the Chinese managed to alleviate poverty and how they are the GDP percentages, it's just amazing for the past 2 decades. So all these data and all these lectures and all these trainings leave you with one question. But what will happen in our African countries if we have a leadership or a module like the Communist Party? Because everything in the Chinese developmental model is related to or giving the credit back to the Chinese Communist Party. So this is the question, basically the simplest question that you get in your mind. What will happen if we have such a party? Do you think that we will achieve some of the amazing developmental goals that China has achieved also? So this is one question, or actually the main question that even the participants will discuss with themselves and their colleagues after each lectures. Wow, well, if we had that, maybe we would not be so much developing countries. We would be, more developed. But actually, I think, and this is the main topic that I'm trying to raise here. Is this the same question that we are asking now, or now we have moved from asking, as I'm talking as developing countries, are we still asking whether we can implement this module, or are we in a stage of questioning this module? I mean, with the current, not only the pandemic, but also with the current internal news and reports that are coming from China, definitely that the Chinese Communist Party is facing lots of challenges that we have not heard before, that even we never thought that it's there. So I will just say one statistic again. For example, we always been talking about the how the Chinese how the Chinese party managed to alleviate poverty and all that. But now the differences between the per capita in urban areas and in rural areas is going so large. Now you can have the average per capita in urban areas is 43,000 RMB, while in the rural areas it's 17,000 RMB. That's a lot. That's quite a lot, and definitely the Communist Party is trying to work their way to figure out how to decrease this major inequality, because the major value that the Chinese Communist Party is exporting is equality. Is that they are all about equality, and that development shouldn't be only for the rich, but for everyone. So this is one indicator that something is terribly going wrong, and we don't know how it's going to be dealt, to be frank. Also, another value that the Chinese side is also trying to export and to promote during the training courses and during official meetings, media meetings, and whatever, is that the party is working for the good of the people and for the public good. So if the party is working for the public interest of the Chinese people, then there is also another statistics that is really questioning this issue. In 2018, 2 million new members were accepted in the Chinese Communist Party. Among them, there were only 5,700 who were only workers, farmers, workers, and labor. So this is just, you know, this is hitting them very hard, because the main value is that you are working for the good of the workers, not the businessmen. The majority of the people or the members who are joining the Communist Party lately, they are businessmen, and they have been businessmen. So this creates a question: is the value that you are not only creating an equal model of development, but also implementing your own slogan and your own motto of working for the people and the workers, is it still there, so that we could look up to it and think that it's still a valid inspirational model? This is also questionable. The last indicator that said that there is something is terribly wrong with the model that we are looking at now is that many Chinese academic studies have shown that youth are joining the party not just because they want to serve the people, but because they think that it's better for them to be in the party that will make it easier for them to get a good job or to get a scholarship or to get a personal gain. So again, this is also hitting a major value, which is you're not creating or you're not implementing your slogan that you're working for the people. Now, if you're having everyone that is trying to work for themselves, then you are losing the main value that you are trying to export. So the question that now we should all be thinking about is, all this combined with the pandemic and the energy crisis and the inflation, will the training courses still be an effective tool as it was before? Will we still be asking ourselves the same question, whether the Communist Party is still an inspirational model for some of the African countries, or we are looking forward a decrease in this role, raising more questions and doubts about this role? My personal opinion is that, in the light of all what I have just said, of course, there are raising doubts about whether we can continue looking to this model as an inspirational model or not. And also the inflation and the economic recovery process that is having its toll on all of us, of course, the Chinese economy too. So maybe the training courses will not be very effective as it was before in the near future. Yes, we still have training courses that are being conducted online, but it's not the same as effective as it was when you're going there and you see the people and get in touch with them and go to factories and companies. Maybe the travel ban will be lifted soon, who knows, but still, given the fact that there are still major indicators saying that there is something wrong with this model, then you will not going to be able to promote it, not even with 1,000 training courses a year. So it will be very difficult unless you deal with the internal issues so that you can make your model look more interesting as it was before. Thank you so much, and hopefully I didn't take much time.
No, that was fantastic, Iman. Really a wonderful presentation. So let me thank all of the presenters for excellent presentations. And so what I'm going to do here is, because we've got about 20 minutes left in the panel, is I'm going to put a question to each panelist, and then you can, I guess we'll start with Professor Yu, and so Professor Zheng, so you guys can think about the questions. And so, and then we can turn to any questions in the queue that the audience might have, they could put into the Q&A function. So Professor Yu, Professor Zheng, here's my question for you. How optimistic are you in the age of COVID-19, right? This point that Iman just made about the lack of personal interactions, which, as you know, Professor Chinya Chen talks about in his theory of relationality, maintaining the relationship through consistent interactions is really essential. Do you think that, you know, from the age of Zhou Enlai until today that you laid out, can China continue to expand and improve its relations with Africans if it lacks the interpersonal side of the relationship? Does it need that interpersonal interaction, or can the Zoom function, can it keep the relations from afar? For Professor Van Noort, excellent comments. I guess my question is, you know, often we think of expectations, right? In economics, they talk a lot about expectations. And if expectations are high and results are low, then the market suffers more than if expectations were low and the results are low, right? So in this case, it seems that China, through its narrative creation, has created a lot of very positive imagery and expectations among Africans. You give us the example of the SGR. But as we may hear from our friend Cliff, who's in Kenya later today, I'm curious, there's been a change in narrative about the SGR in particular. And so is there, as problems arise, as they do in all projects, I mean, not all projects, but projects arise naturally in the world, right? The law of unintended consequences, and no projects are going to be 100% successful. So is there then more disappointment because of this romanticization that you talk about? And so how is China dealing with this question, right? If there is tension, if there is problem, how does China grapple with it within their narrative creation? Is it just continue to push the old narrative, or are there adjustments in the narrative that you see? And for Iman, again, fantastic. And I should mention that Iman is coming to Notre Dame. She's going to be a postdoc here. We're thrilled to have her for all the reasons that you've just heard. This idea of the China development model has evolved over time. And one could argue that 10 years ago, China didn't necessarily have a development model, but that the idea of promoting a model has evolved over time and become more salient as Chairman Xi Jinping talked about telling a good Chinese story. Right, sharing Chinese experiences, offering China's experiences to the world. And so how can China, you know, when you put yourself out there as a model, you're going to take some judgment, right? Because whenever you say, look at me, then people will judge you. They will judge you good, they will judge you bad, but they will judge. So going forward, do you think China should continue to promote a development model, that is a good way, and that it should alter its approach somewhat, in what ways, of course, or that it should go back in time, if you were, and basically cease promoting such a model because it's calling these kinds of eyes to look upon it? And then a final question, but this is a more Chinese domestic politics, is the current slogan in China is a collective prosperity. China is putting a variety of different methods in place to address the inequalities that you were talking about. And so I guess this program, which we don't know will be successful or not, but it's been begun, has that had any impact on perceptions in Africa, in Cairo, that China is seeing the problems that you mentioned and seeking to address them? Does that China agrees with a lot of the issues you've raised and then has policies? But I wonder, has that reached, do you believe, Africans? Do they know that China is seeking to address these problems? And does it matter if ultimately these problems cannot be addressed? Anyway, so with those very simple questions, I will go ahead and turn to Professor Zheng Yu for his first response.
Great. Thank you very much, Josh, for your questions. And also, I want to thank the other two panelists for their excellent, presentation. I would personally, I think this is something we can really generate a lot of discussions. So first of all, to Josh's questions, whether I think this is how optimistic am I on this kind of a future of the China-African those kind of interactions without this kind of interpersonal relations. I do see this is really a big concern. So I think it's, first of all, I think this is so like personal experience. My students who actually now in Africa but cannot actually come to China to study. So we do having this kind of occasionally having this kind of through this WeChat conversation. But I think there's a lack of this interpersonal connections really, hurts this kind of like, the communication. First of all, I think is we do have this virtual meetings or, but that's not the same. So, but I think this on that part, absolutely. I think this lack of the interpersonal connection is certainly going to hurt this kind of like a communication, especially I think it's what China's is, the way it was so like sharing its experience was one of the
Oh, it seems Professor Zheng, you may be frozen. At least he seems to be for me. He's just dropped off. Professor Van Oort, why don't you go ahead and take the second question? And if Professor Zheng Yu is able to rejoin. He's back.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I think that's just connection problem. So I think that's, the this lack of this interpersonal communication certainly was, a big drawback. I think it's, but hopefully this is going to be the short-term thing, because I think it's, we don't know where all of us is waiting for this kind of lift of the restrictions so we can do international travel to have our students to come back. That being said, I think this is, there's a two-part. First is to look at the short-term impacts of the COVID, and the second is to look at the long-term. So do we really see this kind of like a shifting of this, the direction of China gradually, from, purpose that we are open to more to this Western world. Now I think it's more, certainly put more emphasis on this, the global South, especially through this Belt and Road Initiative. So I think on that part, I think it's China certainly was actually, continue to engage, even actually put more resource or, on, interactions with this, global South, especially with Africa. So, but also I would, want to just address part of this, the questions about this, the AMAs on this kind of like, how this China model would be really appealing to this, African public. So my understanding is actually, well, there's a lot of debate inside China. What we really see is whether we do have a model or we are just try to kind of like sharing this kind of sort of like experience. So I think even today, I think there's a very, this official discourse will consider this is we're actually sharing this kind of experience, not actually we're trying to replicate this model. And even I think for the scholarly debate, it's actually even we using the term as model, it's more like we use it as alternative, right, to this sort of like this kind of conventional or classical development model, which was being promoted. You can learn from this classical development economics. So I think this China, if we call this model, is never will be considered as a perfect one, because it's just, it certainly has prioritized, economic growth on a lot of other things. Even if you look at the China's own experience, it's when it's having this rapid growth, it certainly has, have a lot of like, side effects or this cost it has paid, including this environmental degradation or rising inequality. I think I noticed there's a comments, questions on this, the discussion board that I think this is sort of like it was true. I think it's never something could be clarified that this kind of model, but I think that as any sort of like a developing country go through this stage, you're taking this kind of gradual and approach to dealing with these things, prioritize your development goals. So I don't think these things could be solved at the same time. It probably will have to kind of like deal with that, sequentially, and also it depends on those different situations in different countries. So that's just my answer and also my comments on this. on the panel's presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I see as Professor Zheng Yu is talking, several other questions popping up. So the quicker we can answer the questions, hopefully I can get to a couple of more here. We'll go to about 9:25 because I gave some comments at the beginning. I don't want to take any time from our panel. So that gives us about at least 10 more minutes for Q&A. So Professor Van Oort, the floor is yours. Whither these narratives?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Well, when it comes to China's communication, it remains, as I've seen also in other cases, they remain quite positive. Even they do raise, for example, some videos, things about debt, but then they say, no, don't worry about it. So they keep this kind of a positive approach to it. Obviously, when it comes to perceptions of the SGR in Kenya, in part it is maybe partially affected by BRI communication, but in many ways it's affected by direct experience of the SGR, a direct experience of Chinese businessmen, migrants, etc. And so when it comes to the success of the SGR, there's many factors that affect that, including whether all the sections are being built and find finance, and when there's more cargo, when it's going up, and the stakeholders, it's both Chinese and Kenyans that are involved in the success. So I think there are a lot of things to take into account. The answer is not as simple. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Iman, I'm going to tag along a question here I saw in the Q&A. Hong Zhang from Johns Hopkins SISU, my own alma mater, asks you if any of the Chinese training you saw, and he put this in quotations, stick in terms of recipients countries actually picking up any of these training beyond the model, but the actual, like if they're talking about agriculture, I assume, are they actually improving agriculture, et cetera. So maybe you can add that tag along to the question I asked and take them both.
Okay. Well, first of all, any model will have people or politicians who would be judging it and saying that it's not good or it's very good. But the problem is that when you have a judgment or an argument, you will also have on the other side a counter argument and a counter judgment that will justify why you're having this. So, for example, you will be justified that you are having a one-party system because you have China is a very special country and a very special community, and this is the only type of political system that will suit China. This could be an argument, but when you're looking at the figures that says that there is a very wide range disparity in the per capita, you cannot justify that. You will have to say that, yeah, I need to work harder to get it more together. Whether now we are perceiving in the African countries some flaws in the model or in the Chinese narrative, if model, you think it's not an accurate word, but actually I think it is an accurate word. And yes, there is a Chinese model, whether we like it or not, it's there. And through the training courses and through other means of communication, the Chinese are trying to promote that. And there is nothing wrong with this, to refute it or to say no. It's how it is. If every country, every major country does that, to be frank and to be honest. Lately, there have been many news, some reports in the media that is stating that there is something wrong when it comes to the economic performance, the energy crisis that is hitting everyone, the climate change that is also hitting everyone. The problem is that in the background of our mind, we thought that China would be more prepared. That's it. I'm not talking to you now as a researcher or anything. I'm just talking as a citizen. I was looking at this news and say, but shouldn't they be more prepared? I mean, what if we have this here in Egypt? Then, oh my God, it will be a catastrophe. If you are having that much hard time, then what are we going to do? So it's just the same. Hopefully I have answered the question. Now there is, to be more honest, there are more people who are criticizing and questioning and doubting the Chinese model of development. Regarding the question that I would ask, I'm trying to read it again because it didn't stick in my mind, but I think that the question was about whether there was like an instruction or influence to have a one-party system, or to have a certain practices that we have to go back and take it back home. I already indicated that in my very humble presentation. I said, no, this is not how anything works. Of course, I'm not going to walk into a room and tell you, you have to have a communist party in your country. You have to eliminate all the parties and make it only one and name it the Egyptian Communist Party. Of course not, that can never happen. But as I was saying, when you're looking at the model and the developmental experience, which is always linked to the efforts of the Communist Party of China, you will be asking yourself one question. If this model works here, then can it work back home? Can it work? This is the question that every participant was asking and debating among ourselves. So hopefully I have answered the question, and hopefully I didn't take much time either.
No, that was fantastic. And I think that you raised a very important point, which is in the United States anyway, we seem to be very concerned with whether China thinks it's promoting its model. But the real question is, in this case, do Africans think it's promoting its model, right? So, and I think that is a very important point that you raise, and I think one that we in the United States need to take on board more, which is that it's often the recipient who determines what they see, and that's a very important point. I see a question in the chat here. I can maybe put it to everybody, and somebody can jump in. That's Shanghai asks, what is the cultural elements in BRI? And of course, Professor Van Oort, your work touches on this maybe specifically, but anybody who wants to jump in terms of the cultural elements of BRI. All right, well, that's okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jung-Yu.
Well, I don't think it's a, I think this is so like a, well, of course, I think this is more from this kind of like we're thinking about the narrative that the BRI, they were called this fine connections, right? This interconnections. So they think this, but most of the connections people understand is about like infrastructure, or roads, or through other kind of connections. But there's one particular connections I think it's about communication. So I think it's the cultural part of this one has been I think it's been less studied. Really, I think there's most the studies has been paid attention to this kind of like the physical one, right? This kind of like infrastructure. So I think this kind of communication things as also which I think this is really make me think about Emma's point about this is really it's the recipients that decide whether this is really China's promoting its model. I agree. I totally agree. I think this is really it's the way there's a lot of things China could improve. It's a way of the communication, not just through this official channels or narratives. Everybody was doing that. There should be kind of like a lot of more variety of the versions of channels, through that, they could have in more communication or interactions. So personally, I think this is something we do. I do think this is there's nothing you can hide about. There's a China model, right? Because it is the way how China developed itself. So I think is when I wrote my studies, I think my doing research, I think this is a model. but I think it's, but certainly I think that meet lots of like resistance that, the official or some other scholars will think this is, no, we're not actually called this as a model. We're being tried to be kind of like put it in a different terms. But I think this is, you will intentionally try to conceal this kind of as a model. It's not a good way, because I think it's as you point out, if your recipients already think this is a model, so why we are just admit this is kind of like things where, it is, there's a sort of like a China way of the, approach of this kind of development. It could be considered as a model. Yeah, just like quick comment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. And Professor Van Noort, do you want a last comment here as we wrap up the panel? Go for it.
Just want to elaborate. So obviously culture does play an important part when it comes to Belt and Road relations. China emphasizes a lot when it comes to cultural heritage, the governance of it. It works through UNESCO as well. It tries to get various Silk Road places recognized. And all of that is to try to create, a lot of working relations, and that build, more trust, and building on that, they start working more economically. So the cultural aspect is quite important when in terms of bilateral relations, even though it obviously doesn't directly affect the infrastructure projects itself. They're quite important in terms of creating better relations. Yeah.
Just as we wrap up here, I just want to say it's actually fascinating to me that the Chinese culture hasn't proven more attractive around the world, because I am fascinated by Chinese culture. I studied my undergraduate in it. I love going to China. I love that engagement with Chinese culture. I would have done it for a living if my language ability were high enough. And so for me, the fact that we have manga, we have Korean boy bands, we have this stuff but we don't have really much in terms of Chinese cultural engagement, at that level. We don't have the Chinese equivalent of the NBA or Manchester United being very popular. I think that's a space for perhaps some improvement. And I also want to just second what Professor Zheng Yu said at the end there. I had a very interesting engagement with Chinese friends where I was actually looking at Xi Jinping's speech where he's saying we have to offer new opportunities, and they were debating what that meant and whether that was a model. So I think this is an excellent conversation, and one that we're going to take into our next panel. So I see we're wrapping up here at 9:27. So why don't we take 10 minutes and come back at around 9:37 and then pass the baton over to Professor He Wenping from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, my old friend, who I'm excited to hear. She will be moderating the next panel. We're in that panel, just to let you all know, will be Professor Anton Lukongo from the DRC, Professor Lena Abdullah from Wake Forest University, and Professor Zhou Jingyuan from Shanghai International Studies University. So stick with us. We're just going to take a quick break, and we'll see you all in about 10 minutes. Thank you to all of the panelists for excellent presentations. All right, everybody, if we can reconvene our session, we'll begin our third panel. I just want to turn the microphone over to Cliff Mboya, who's going to be hosting our third session. Cliff, as you heard at the beginning, has a PhD from Fudan University, one of the most prestigious in China. Cliff also worked for several years at the Chinese embassy in Kenya. So he's got some excellent personal relations and understandings beyond many other folks. So I'm gonna pass the mic over to Cliff. Cliff, the floor is yours. Thank you. You're still muted, my friend.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Eisenman, for your kind words. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, all participants, and everyone, wherever you are. So welcome to the third panel. And I'll begin, but I'll make this very brief. And let me begin by asking the panelists to keep time. Let's keep it between 10 and 12 minutes max. So briefly, I'll just say that the entry of Chinese media in Africa has generated a lot of interest from scholars, stakeholders, and African journalists, and even from Western countries. And from my own perspective, due to the global nature of big power competition, this has created a duality of views. You know, sometimes you seem lost between the Western view and the Chinese view, which is not very healthy. And in the age of misinformation and disinformation, I feel that it is important for scholars like us to try and bridge the information gap that is being created by this scenario. So I'm glad that I have these distinguished scholars in my panel who have a lot of experience in media relations, social media, in disinformation in Africa. And I'm looking forward to hearing their deep insights on the topic and learning from them as well. So in this panel, we have Professor Dani Madrid Morales from the University of Houston. He's an assistant professor of journalism. And his research falls on the nexus between global media studies, international politics, and popular culture. And his research also focuses on the global South, particularly East Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So, Professor Morales, welcome to the panel. Then I think let's start with Professor Morales, then I'll introduce the other panelists just before they speak. So I'll hand over the microphone for Professor Morales, and let's hear what you have to share with us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mboya. Thank you to the organizers for having me here today, and I'll try to keep to time. So the 3 points that I want to make in today's presentation, and they are like this. The first one, and a few of the speakers today already made this point, is that we need to make a difference between the breadth and the width of the presence of Chinese media in Africa and the actual influence. We tend to conflate the two ideas, but it's not the same to be present in many countries to having a lot of influence in many countries. And I'll show you with some data that we've been collecting over the last few years that the impact of Chinese media on the general population, at least in the countries that I studied, which are Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, is actually quite limited. And I'll provide you with details of a series of surveys that we've conducted in these 3 countries. And I'll also try to show that the influence of Chinese media on the actual news agendas of most African media are quite limited, even though the impact is uneven depending on which countries you look at. So those are the 3 points that I want to make here. Just as a quick overview, as many of you probably already know, Chinese media have been returning to Africa, and it's important to remember that they are returning. It's not that they've never been there. We had a lot of African media in the 1950s and 60s, Chinese media, that were already present on the continent. So in this return, they are taking part in multiple different industries. You have them developing infrastructure, like the cases of Huawei, for example. You also have them in training, and we've had a whole session on training, so I will not spend too much time on this. We also have them producing content, and probably the best example is Cgtn Africa. We have them distributing content. You have the case of Star Times, called Starsat in South Africa, which is the largest, or one of the largest paid TV providers in Africa. You also have some Chinese media doing direct investment. And the most well-known case here is the purchase or acquisition of 20% of independent media, a South African company, by Chinese investors. And also in the last few years, we've seen a lot of push by some Chinese media into this public opinion management space, where through social media particularly, they are trying to influence how public opinion perceives China. So this is a very wide range of activities. And sometimes we get confused. I have the feeling, I'll try to make this case, that because they are present in so many different spaces, they're having a lot of influence in all of these spaces. But I don't think that's the case. And for that, let me make an important distinction in my understanding of China-Africa or Africa-China media relations, is that this relationship has two levels. And some of you have already heard about this before. That's a distinction that was made by Park and Alden a few years back. And that's this idea of the upstairs and the downstairs of the relationship, right? And we oftentimes hear a lot about this upstairs, which is government-to-government relations, but we don't know that much about the downstairs dimension and how the media are affecting this downstairs dimension of the relationship. So previous evidence shows that there might be some impact of Chinese media on the content of African media, but this evidence is rather limited. So I want to try to contribute to that sort of like research gap by providing you some evidence from two studies that I've conducted, one with a colleague, Herman Fasterman from the University of Cape Town, another one, and I'll talk about that one at the end of my presentation by myself. So the first part of the presentation is about three rounds of surveys that we've conducted in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. We started conducting these surveys back in 2018, and since then, we've collected about 6,000 surveys. So we've reached quite a wide range of people in three different rounds, 2018, 2020, and 2021. Important to keep in mind those dates. So the first round of surveys was done before COVID-19. The second round of surveys was done right at the middle of COVID-19. And the last round of surveys was just completed last week. So you are going to get very fresh data post COVID-19. So what exactly did we find? Well, here's some of the results that we found. The first thing that we found is that Chinese media have very limited impact in terms of audience. The number of people who actually watch Chinese media, read Chinese media, or listen to Chinese media is very small. This is data from 2018 on people who say that they watch Cgtn. And as you can see, the percentages of all of them are below 10%. South Africa has the lowest percentage. And if you compare that particularly to other global media, such as the BBC or CNN, which have been around for quite a while, the audience of Cgtn is quite small. I can show you data for 2020, and you'll see that there's been a slight increase in the audience between 2018 and 2020. And I can also show you data for 2021, that's from last week, and you'll see that there's a slight increase as years go by. So we started in 2018 with about 1.6% of South Africans saying that they watch Cgtn. That's doubled in 2021, and the increase in the case of Kenya has been slightly smaller. But in general, they still are less popular in terms of a go-to place to get news than other foreign media. We see the same patterns for other. So CRI, for example, has a much lower audience even than Cgtn, even though it's been around for many more years, and it has content both in Hausa and in Swahili. So it has local languages, but that doesn't make it more popular. I can show you data for 2020, for example, where we see a slight increase, but still much, much lower than most other media organizations. And the data for 2021 points towards the same direction, which is a very flat growth for CRI in terms of audience. Now, let me move to China Daily, which is the third, probably most well-known news organization operating in Africa. China Daily launched its own Africa weekly edition in 2012. And as you can see here, again, people who claim to have read China Daily over the past 7 days that we interview them is very small. It's below 1% across all countries. As we've seen with the Cgtn, we see a slight increase in 2020, which I attribute probably to the fact that during COVID-19, many people might have wanted to go to Chinese media to learn more about the virus. So that might explain, which is quite a significant increase. It almost tripled in the case of Nigeria. And if you look after 2020, so the data that we collected just last week, you see that it stayed more or less at the same level. So whatever audience it peaked during the COVID-19 months, it has stayed there for quite a while. So if you take all of this together, as you can see, the audience of Chinese media is relatively small across the three countries, and it more so if you compare it to other foreign media. Now, the second thing that I wanted to show you here is why might it be that this is the case? Why is it that not so many people are turning to Chinese media, despite the fact that some of the coverage is excellent? For example, Cgtn's coverage of Africa. If you've ever watched Cgtn, you'll know that they cover Africa like probably no other foreign media organization. So why is it that the audience is relatively small? Well, we ask people to rate Cgtn on a scale and ask them for these 4 points. So can Cgtn be trusted? Does Cgtn report Africa well? Does Cgtn tell the truth? And how well do you know Cgtn? And we ask them to place them on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is at the bottom of the scale and 1 is at the top. So closer to 1 is a better score, 5 is a worse score. So if you look here, you'll see that Cgtn sort of always falls towards the bottom in all of the items. And particularly important, I think, it's the fact that even though Cgtn, as I just said, probably reports Africa like no other foreign media organization, people still do not perceive that. So Cgtn is not very well known, and it doesn't have a brand image that is as powerful as other news organizations have. I can show you the data compared to other news organizations. So I can show you data for Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, and RT. Those are the 5 networks that we ask people to rank on this 5 to 1. And you can see that BBC and CNN outperform Cgtn in all the metrics, even in things that you would not expect them to do, like CNN does not cover Africa well, but people's perception is that CNN covers Africa better than Cgtn. So there's a brand problem there, and RT is the only one that underperforms Cgtn. So one possible explanation here would be that Chinese media don't have a very strong brand on the continent, and that's something that could be worked by doing better promotion, maybe, for example. Now, the next part of the presentation, I want to link this media consumption that I just presented here to attitudes toward China. Can we see whether people who watch Chinese media or listen to Chinese media have a better perception of China? And for that, we ask people to tell us how they perceive China across a different range of questions involving government, protection of the environment, how free are Chinese media. So there's a whole bunch of items. And if anybody wants to see this later, I know there's a lot of data here. I am happy to share my slides later on if anybody wants to see them in more detail. So when we ask people in Kenya and South Africa for their attitudes towards China, as you can see here, the green bar is 2020, that's COVID-19. There was a dip in perception. So people had a worse perception of China during the COVID-19 period in both Kenya and South Africa. And you also can see that South Africans have worse perceptions of China than Kenyans. But it recovered slightly after COVID-19. So even though there was a dip, it went up again after the pandemic was over. So let me move on so I can keep to time. So let's connect these two items, right? So I just show you that audience is relatively low for Chinese media. I show you that attitudes are slightly different between South Africans and Kenyans. So can we connect these two? Do people that consume Chinese media have better attitudes towards China? The answer is quite strikingly clear. The answer is yes. So here's a chart from a regression model trying to explain attitudes towards China. And you see here a bar that marks 0. So anything that falls to the positive side of this chart are better attitudes. Anything that falls on the other side is more negative attitudes. So what you see here is that people who consume Chinese media or people who have a subscription to Star Times, for example, Star Times being a Chinese company as well, have more positive views of China. While people who consume more global media, BBC, CNN, and so on, have more negative views of China. And the evidence here is quite clear that if you get people to watch Chinese content, they're going to have better attitudes towards China. The problem is that not that many people are watching Chinese media. Okay, the last minute that I have here before my time is up, I want to show you the other piece of evidence that I brought you here, which is data from a paper that just published earlier this year, which is an analysis of 500,000 news articles about COVID-19 that were published in all these countries that you see here on the map. So we looked, or I looked in this case, at whether Chinese media were having an influence on the content, and I did that in two different ways. Let me show you the next chart. The first thing that we did is, or I did, was look at how much content from Chinese media, say Xinhua, gets published on African media word by word. And what I found there is that actually very little content gets published as is. I know that there's a lot of data here, so I'll try to point at what's most relevant here. If you look at the top quadrant here where it says China, and there's a whole bunch of countries around it, that tells you what's the percentage of news stories in these countries that came from Xinhua directly. And as you can see, in most cases, it's less than 1% of the content. Now you compare that to the other side, which is the French news agency, AFP, and you'll see that in some countries like Kenya, almost 10% of the content comes word by word from a French news agency. So even though AFP is a lot more expensive and that Xinhua provides the content for free, in most cases, Kenyan media and a few other countries prefer to use the content from the French news agency. And you'll see that happening as well for English language content, even though it's more clear in the French language content. But overall, if you look at the data, it shows you that almost 65% of news stories that are about China that are published on African media actually come from French sources. And only 7% of stories that are about China come from Chinese media. And I'll have you one more slide and I'll stop here. The other way that we can measure this is by looking at the narratives that appear on the media. So here's a list of some of the top narratives that Chinese media covered during the COVID-19 crisis. So for example, they focus a lot on Chinese media, China's global cooperation, or the situation in Wuhan, or how China was in control of the situation. Now compare that to the cases of Gambia and Kenya. You'll see that the top story about COVID-19 and China in both these countries was the cases of racism or alleged racism in Guangzhou. That was not covered mostly by Chinese media, but it was very much covered by both Gambian and Kenyan news organizations. And if you compare these two cases, I like Gambia and Kenya as an example because Gambia actually relies a lot on Chinese content as opposed to Kenya that does not. So you see two of the most covered topics on the Gambian media are the same as in Chinese media, but you don't see that in Kenya. So the summary of all of these, and I'll stop here, is that the impact is quite uneven. So in a country like Gambia, there's a lot more reliance on Chinese content than in a country like Kenya. And that generally, if you talk specifically about audiences, for most cases, there has little impact, mostly because most people are not watching or reading Chinese content. So a lot more should be done to promote that kind of content. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for those insightful insights. And from your data, I think it is pretty evident that Chinese media still has a lot to do in the continent to achieve the kind of results that they desire. So I have a question, but maybe because of time, let's move to the next panelist and then I will ask the questions at the same time once they are done. So our next panelist is Professor Emeka Umeje from the University of Ghana. And he's a leading scholar of Chinese media and Chinese digital infrastructure in Africa. And his research interests include Chinese media, Chinese digital infrastructure, issues to do with misinformation in sub-Saharan Africa. And his latest book titled Chinese Media in Africa, Perception, Performance, and Paradox, which was published to wide acclaim, is a very important book, and the insights will be very helpful in this forum, just to bring out the issues that we are trying to look at in this forum. So Professor Umeje, welcome to the panel, and let's hear your insights on Chinese media in Africa. You're welcome.
Thank you so much to the organizers. First, I would like to correct an impression. I am not a professor. I am a doctor. and I'm a lecturer at the University of Ghana. I hope. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Eisenman. I hope I can share my screen here, right? Okay. So my presentation is just looking at China's kind of renewed engagement in the media in Africa, and I called it a multi-faceted media engagement in Africa. Before now, at the earlier stage, China relied so much on its state-led media, that is Cgtn, Xinhua News Agency, China Daily, People's Daily, and China Radio International. It also did a lot of equipment donation to African media organizations, state-led broadcasters, and in Africa. That was at the outset of his engagement in the African media space. But there seemed to have been some form of recapitulation of engagement. It appeared that they sat back and just say, okay, but because what appeared is that the state-led model had limited influence. So it did not create the anticipated success that China anticipated in Africa. So despite the expenditure, the investment in its state-led media in Africa, not much influence had been recorded. So there was some form of re-examination of model, of engagement in the African media space. And well, what appeared to be a viable model was the Star Times approach. Star Times has this pretense to being a private enterprise, even though we know it is state-funded. So the Chinese people seem to have said, okay, it appears as if, well, that model is not working. Let's go back to something else, especially on the platform of the Belt and Road Initiative. So now what we have is a multi-faceted approach to media engagement. And what does it imply? Well, you have a combination of both China's state-led media and local media organizations in Africa. So you have everything is coordinated under the Belt and Road Initiative. So you have the Belt and Road News Network. You have Contention agreement with local news agencies in Africa. You have media exchanges and training for journalists in Africa. You have free subscription to Xinhua Agency for African Media Organization. Then you have the wolf warrior diplomacy, which happens on social media, especially Twitter. So we just look at some of these. For instance, so what is the objective of the multi-faceted approach? One, to exert its influence in the African media landscape. Provide a positive narrative of China-Africa relations, provide a positive narrative of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and provide a counter to Western media framing of China in Africa. And then, for instance, the Belt and Road News Network, which emerged from President Xi Jinping's address at the first Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in 2017. It basically facilitates its members to tell the stories about the Belt and Road Initiative in a way that shapes healthy public opinion and helps BR. So it's just about telling a better story of the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. And it comprises of 208 media organizations from 98 countries with 7 of the 40-member media council from Africa. So you have media organizations from Africa also sitting on the board of the Belt and Road News Network. So what happens in this case is that, if China is promoting propaganda through its state-led media, it's going to be, because of the trust issues, that come with Chinese media, people are still going to, most Africans might not believe it, but when it is done through African-based media organizations, it is easier for instance, a Ghanaian to believe what is being broadcast on the Ghanaian news agency or the local TV station in Ghana than to believe it if it is on Xinhua News Agency or Cgtn, because it will seem as if, well, this is normal Chinese Chinese government propaganda. Then we move on to content sharing agreement. It has been in place earlier, but it's being reinforced, over time. So we have more content sharing agreement being negotiated by the Chinese state media broadcasters, even with some private media organizations. In recent times, some have happened in Syria alone. There's one with a recent Nigerian startup Chinese media organization. So these are part of the bargain. It's all to ensure that in the long run, you have local media organizations also promoting Chinese propaganda, not just Chinese state media organizations, solely promoting Chinese propaganda in Africa. So, so media exchanges are training for journalists in Africa. This is big. We just concluded the recent research on this in 3 African countries, and I must confess to you, there are some feasible impact here, because some of these journalists who go to China and return say, well, they say, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. We have limited capacity building opportunity in Africa, and China is stepping into, to close this gap. And then we are happy to participate in these trainings in China, even though they are also still paid for it. So it's something that they kind of appreciate that China is offering to them. And lastly, you have the free subscription to Xinhua, which is very, very prominent in many African countries, even though there's still limited influence of this free subscription. I remember during my fieldwork in Kenya, a particular journalist who worked for Xinhua was telling me, well, that he couldn't understand why China was offering content free of charge to African media, even though most African newspapers don't even get to use most of them. But this happened. And then lastly, so is the multi-faceted approach, is it a success? Well, yes and no. In some countries in Africa, Chinese media and China are beginning to enjoy positive media attention as a result of media exchanges are training for African journalists. Now, what happens is, for instance, I give the example of Nigeria. Most journalists who have gone to China and who have seen what China is done in terms of infrastructure, then they are saying, well, do you expect us to see, okay, they just launched the new Lagos Ibadan rail line. Do you want us to see it and keep blind eyes? It's impossible. That's something would happen, and we are going to report it the way it has happened. You go to Sierra Leone, for instance, some of these journalists are saying, well, we can see what is happening here. We are seeing new stadiums. We are seeing new roads being built. We have to report it because it's what is being done. So this is also happening in so many other African countries. So yes, but in some other African country, especially where you have established constitutional democracy in places like South Africa, for instance, it's very, very limited. Maybe because, well, I don't think I'm yet to see very massive infrastructure development in South Africa being done by China. But as it is now, places like South Africa, there's not much because of pushback from the local, from the media system in South Africa. Then maybe you go to somewhere like Kenya. It's also not very, very, it's neither here nor there. However, it is not, it's going to be a marathon. It's a long distance race. And the good thing is that China is ready for it. China is not in need for the 10, 20 years. They're in need for the long haul. So it could be the next 50 years. And I believe they are hopeful that they will achieve something in the long run, So in conclusion, I think that, well, in the short to medium term, here, China's influence in the African media, it will be limited, yeah. But in the long term, we see that manifest. Something's going to happen, So even though the Western media may remain dominant, China will gain a foothold in the African media space. And I end my presentation here. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Umeje, for your great insights. And I'll come back to you with a question after the last presentation. And now, quickly, we move on to Professor Wang Duanyong from the Shanghai International Studies University, SISU. Professor Wang, you're here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I can see on the screen. So you have the floor. Please go ahead and.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you for Josh. But I know now we have a very limited time, so I want to now I can go to the talk directly. Please, now I share my presentation. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Actually, but today my presentation is, I guess maybe similar to the Danny, the professor's material. But actually, so anyone, okay, I can talk now. Actually, we just rethinking the so-called communication effect of Chinese media in Africa. In Africa, it's not African, but we can talk about if it's a success or failure. But it's up to which angle from. So I will talk about the three sessions. One is Chinese media development in Africa. And the second is I will talk about the case study. Actually, is the data analysis, and finally we can I can talk about the re-evaluation. That's the communicating effect. First of all, please notice. I know the Danny do the exciting the wonderful job on the Chinese major media in Africa. So I don't want to talk more, but I just draw this map by the my data. But please notice, actually, we always know Xinhua News Agency. Now the Xinhua News Agency in the 33 African country and has 35 national brands and the two regional the headquarters. So one is the so-called Middle East headquarters in Cairo. Another is the Africa headquarters in Kenya. And the People Daily has the four branches in the four African countries. And the Cgtn, we know his headquarters in Africa is in Kenya. Actually, this headquarters is the CCTV, the first the branch abroad. And the China Daily, and it has the Africa headquarters in Kenya. Even China Daily launched its Africa version 10 years ago. And but please notice this all of these countries with the gray color. But it means until now there are at least 21 African countries. They have no the Chinese major news agency branch, but it didn't mean that the Chinese media didn't pay attention to this country. Maybe most of this country always just the small or the too dangerous, but the most of the affairs always taken by its neighbor, the country's branch. And and the second, I want to do China aid to African media development, but just now that Josh and the other the colleague always talk about this. I don't want to talk more. But please notice this. Actually, the China aid to African media development always always get more and more. We can say step by step. Please notice that. In the focus, the fifth ministry always just to launch the first forum, the China-Africa Prize Cooperation, and in 3 years in the Johannesburg summit, it launched the so-called 10 major program to the cooperation between China and Africa, and one of is the people-to-people and the cultural exchange program. And for this, in this program, the China to train 1,000 African journalists per year. And the most important is so-called access to satellite TV for the 10,000 Africa village. And in another 3 years, the FOCAC Beijing summit, so it changed the 8 major action. And so the most important, the new program is to set up the collaboration, the network of China and Africa. I took this picture in Uganda 3 years ago, but I noticed, please notice this, and the China aid, start time, and please notice start time satellite. Actually, this this program is very important, but it means that more than 10,000 villages and in 25 African countries benefit from this project. And China government always donate about the 200,000 the STB to African families. And so please, Antoine, please notice I took this picture 2 years ago in your home in Kinshasa, but
yes,
you remember? But actually, this
yes, I do.
Time channel, and it's a conf
Yes.
channel. I always take this as the very popular the TV play and the cartoon in China. But I was astonished at that time, and so please note the conf channel. All programs has been translated English and French. Apart from TV, the TV program, actually it's a mechanism or what we can say the system project. And apart from the TV and the TV program, the start time always provide digital TV operator and TVB and a solar power system according to the factor of the Africa. It's a quite different. But just as Danny just mentioned, the prevalent narrative always said with the increased investment by Chinese media, many people always think maybe China will get the very strong influence in China, but in fact, I took this case study. I recommend strongly the paper of Danny, but I always get a very good the idea from this paper, but I don't want to talk about it. I guess maybe many people, especially the African friend, always remember this so-called Africa in Guangzhou discrimination. But I don't want to talk more about this. But until now, this some people always talk about this. I just want to say that Nigeria former Prime Minister denied the rumor on the April 5th. Just this accident happened 4 days, but BBC still report this after the Nigeria foreign minister denied this rumor, and the Washington Post has the long and in-depth the investigation on this accident. But I don't want to talk about this. But the point is that please notice another accident. But I don't know how many people know this murder. But actually, just the so-called Africa in Guangzhou discrimination, after 1 month, 3 Chinese murdered in Zambia, Lusaka. But please notice, but I at that time I asked my friend, some of the China Africa started the export in Europe, that no one knows this accident. But please notice that this blog on this the local newspaper, well done, and so many unfriendship talking. But just for this accident, I noticed that a new the direction, but actually Nigeria, but the Chinese embassy in Nigeria always the private many reports on the Chinese aid to Nigeria and the Chinese attitude to the so-called discrimination and the Chinese communicating with the local host countries. After that, I do data collecting from all of Chinese embassy and consulate official website in Africa. Please notice, I got this I do the brief discrimination status about the all-of message. Actually, from the starting, for beginning of the COVID-19 until to the first half this year, I got the message on COVID-19 on this official website, China Embassy and Consulate Africa, more than 10,000 message, including the 53 embassy and the 7 consulate January from last year to this year, but about 1 year and a half. But I have some very interesting finding. Please notice, according to this message, Chinese ambassador, many Chinese ambassadors always publish article in the local newspaper. Until this data, I got about the 400 articles by Chinese ambassador. The majority, most of it published the local the media. Just a majority the published the domestic media, for such as the People's Daily. And the Chinese embassy always talking with the public, including through the interview and the press conference, the seminar, and the lecture about at least about the close to 700 times. And Chinese ambassador the official meetings with the local official about more than 2,000. And we notice Chinese this official website always report or reprint article was written by the local writer about 1,060 articles. It's please notice, please compare this. It means very interesting, but it means the Chinese embassy and the consulate just try to find the new way to promote the so-called public diplomacy. It's a new way. Like this, the Chinese ambassador at Egypt. But please notice in the different every country, it's the message is quite different. In the South Africa, in South Africa, China has 1 embassy and 4 consulate general. But all of this official website, they published about more than 10,000, 1,000 message. And apart from follow that, it's Egypt, Algeria, and another country. So I guess I have a very limited time, but just last time. But okay. I got this very interesting finding, but it's in China trying to find a new way to except from the traditional major media to influence locals, but without expedited influence. Why China and Chinese major media always heavy invested in Africa? I got this. The data from the, okay, sorry, I need the 3 minutes. Please notice that in the past 20 years, China Daily always has this chart shows the China Daily the articles on Africa in each year. Please notice that in 26 and 27 of the GATT summit, and even this is the Beijing summit. And if we can get all of the information on the different continents, for example, Africa, Europe, Asia, and the US, but we can notice that apart of the number of articles on Africa just follow US, but you know, US always the most important issue in China, but it means that Africa always get high the attention. Please notice global times, but in global times, without doubt, the USA is very important, but Africa, a little attention. The China Daily is similar, but Africa always gets not so much, but not so bad the attention. Please notice, actually, Africa it's not it's just share very little. Oh, sorry, very little share in the Chinese the international trade. Until now, the trade with Africa always share about the 3 or 4% of the China international trade, and for example, like this, and if by investment, China, the Africa just get a share about the 2% of Chinese outward of FDI. But please notice that China, the 3 major media, People Daily, this audience are always the officials, so-called the people inside the system. Global Time is always the nationalist. China Daily is a so-called high-end group. You could explain why there are quite different with this 3 major media on the Africa report. And rethinking the last one. Actually, this media, but you can just now, Danny, I agree with just now the Danny side. Actually, the Chinese media has a very little influence in Africa. It's right, but please notice, until now, this Chinese major media, this audience, most are Chinese, not a foreigner. So the major media, actually, they are not globally. They are domestic media, but the core mission to just service to the domestic. So just in terms of this, Africa get much more attention in China than it's actually influence in terms of economic and political. So we can say this Chinese domestic and partly get succeed. So, but the situation is changing. The traditional diplomacy, China and Africa is this, but now it's quite different. Actually, China has to retain the normal development with all of country. Please notice recently, President side we should have the 平视外交. But I guess most of people always think this talking about China with the USA and the so-called advanced country. But I think this topic is about all of country. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I spent too much time. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Wang. Those are very insightful points that you've made there. So I think we don't have Dr. King anymore, so we'll just move on with the program, right? So I'll go back to Professor Danny Morales, and I think there's a very important question from the panel. I think since it relates to your data, I think it's important that you clarify that, and it concerns your research participants. The question is, who are your research participants? Are they journalists in the intellectual class, politicians, students, etc.? And because the person believes this could have implications for the questions and the extent of Chinese influence. I think that is important for most people. So maybe we could check on that first.
Sure. Thank you, Toby, for the question. Good to see you here. So for the survey data, it's nationally representative. So we asked a percentage of people that reflects the actual population of all of these countries through different metrics, so different gender, age groups, provinces. So what we are trying to look at this point is the general population, right? So we've talked about this multiple times in other conferences, for example, whether who's the end audience of some of these Chinese media? Are they media people who is actually watching and who should be watching this kind of content? And what we wanted to do with this data is look at the regular folk, the people on the street kind of thing, and draw a wide sample of people. So there's, to your question, we did not target specifically intellectuals or politicians. We targeted the entire population, like you would do in a normal survey in any other country.
Mm. Well, I hope that clears the concerns regarding the participants. And while you are speaking, I think it is evident from your presentation that there's a trust, there's trust issue when it comes to Chinese media in Africa, and your data shows that. And one thing that I'm constantly confronted with when it comes to China-Africa relations, be it media, be it politics, and generally people-to-people relations, is the gap between perception and reality, you know? So I was just wondering, like, you know, this is data that you've collected from participants, and it shows, maybe someone could argue that that's just their perception. And I've come across many scholars or even people who subscribe to the belief that, okay, we don't care about the perception, you know, the reality is different. So I'm not sure if you've gone to that extent, but from your point of view, what is the gap between that set of perception and the reality, you know?
I think that Professor Benatala earlier on said that she could take an hour to talk about Confucius Institutes. I could take a week to talk about these, right? But to give you a short answer, and to a point that somebody else made in the comments, and I think that this anonymous attendee is 100% right. I cannot but say you're right. Yes, we need more Africans speaking about African topics, and I wish that there were more here. So I'm sorry. All I can bring is my expertise on this topic. And to your point, Cliff, so we ran another survey. I'm always doing surveys these days because I cannot go back to China, unfortunately, because it's closed for us to go back and do anything there. So we ran a survey recently about misinformation. And we actually asked people this really short, simple question, and that was, do you think that Africans were discriminated against in China during the COVID crisis in Guangzhou? And we asked that question to Ethiopians and South Africans. And actually, I was very surprised to see that a lot of people in both Ethiopia and South Africa believe that there was no discrimination whatsoever. So, and that to me speaks of this gap, right? So it all depends on what media you consume, who is your source, and that's going to end up impacting what you think about events. If you read social media, you would have read everywhere that there were very serious discrimination against Africans in Guangzhou. We have the case of the McDonald's restaurant. We have the case of people being evicted of their apartments. But if you consume a completely different sort of media diet, you will get a different picture, right? And who determines what's truth and not? It's only people who live through that experience. And all of us I didn't live through that experience. So all I can know is what I saw through the media. And that's going to leave us with a gap. And that gap exists everywhere. You see here in America between Republicans and Democrats that don't agree on the same topic. So there's always a gap in perceptions. It's just how do you close it? I have no answer for you.
Well, I think the way you've answered it makes a lot of sense. And I think the most important thing that you've mentioned there is also that when it comes to these perceptions, the kind of media you consume, and also that plays also into the same thing that we're talking about when it comes to misinformation and disinformation. So people should generally be very careful about the kind of information they consume, you know, like fact checking. And it's a reality that the fact that we have China, they're not just here to tell us good stories about China. A lot of investments have gone into that kind of going out. So we need to interrogate these matters deeply than just taking. And the fact that African countries are most of the acting as conveyor belts for these narratives is problematic, because then where's the analysis? Where's the African point of view? Like, oh, this is what the Chinese are saying, and this is what the West are saying. So what is our own reality in that? So I think that one is also very key, and we should maybe do better when it comes to that. So I'll move to, I didn't see any question from the panelists from Professor Emeka. Okay, he's still here. So my question to him was, I noticed that in his previous works, he's done a lot in terms of the intersection between Chinese media philosophy and African media philosophy. And, you know, most times it is argued that we are being influenced so much by Western media, and that makes it very difficult for Chinese media to engage because they come with a different philosophy. But I liked your journal on hybridizing journalism, the clash of two journalisms in Africa. And it's quite distant from the presentation, but it's also related. So I just want to get from you, like, has there been any mutual learning or gains from both sides, or even from maybe Africa? Or has China learned anything from African journalism in the process of trying to engage with African journalism? And how does that impact the perception of Chinese media, not just in Africa, but also in China? Has it resulted in a more positive view of Africans in China, for example? Dr. Emeka, you there? Okay, so I can't see his video. He's muted, so I'm not sure if he's still there. And then, so let's move to Professor Wang. I think your data was very interesting as well. And it's quite impressive that you don't rely on third-party information. You've actually been to African countries and you make those observations and you have the evidence to help you. And that also helps to bridge the gap between perception and reality. So my question to you is that, many critics of Chinese media in Africa refer to the concept of positive news or positive reporting as propaganda. And the response we get from Chinese scholars or diplomats or just agents from China is that, it's constructive journalism. So the concept of constructive journalism, it's a bit wide and varied, So when you look at the principles of constructive journalism versus what we consider as propaganda as being linked to fake news or just framing issues in a particular way that doesn't give the whole picture, this is the major point of departure when it comes to China-Africa relations. So what are the merits of describing Chinese journalistic principles as constructive? To what extent is it constructive to the African agenda? I don't know if I've made myself clear. It's just some ideas got mixed up in my head, but yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moboya. I want to just mention 2 points. One, just now I showed. One is actually USA and West Europe and Japan is China most important economic partners in the world. Just only USA, the trade with USA share about the 14% of China total trade. But I guess in Chinese paper journalists, we always blame USA. But just now I show actually Africa just share about the only 4% of China total trade and the 2% China outward FDI. But in the past, I can say 65 years, we always say that Africa is the good friend. Even just now the protest letter, they mentioned that Africa country contribute greatly to the China recover the permanent seat in the Security Council of United Nations. But it's a rumor. It's a lie. But Josh, in your article, in your book, you also mention it. But just for in my translation, I write the footnote to point out it's a rumor. But unfortunately, it's a rumor was rooted from China, not from other foreign countries. Why? This is, but just I mentioned the Chinese, the domestic media, especially, but not I use the sentence is a major media. But we know you always like to use the state-owned media, but actually it's the same meaning. But just I mentioned this. We can say the public relation department. You always say the propaganda, but I always the official public the relations department. Actually, please notice that their core mission just the service for Chinese domestic governance. Even, China always spend about the million or the 10 million US dollar in Times Square per year, but it's not for US people, it's just for Chinese people. This is why I talk about it, but today the point is not to discuss the so-called discrimination. I just raise this case to show why BBC, Washington Post, and other Western Europe, especially I appreciate the paper by Danny. You give the very exact data to show actually the French media and the UK media always have a very strong influence in Africa, much more than Chinese media. Why? But we can say Chinese media has a very short history and a very the short of experience. But maybe it's right. But the most important is that until now, this Chinese state-owned media, it's first. I can say it's a priority. It's not to persuade foreigner. It's just to persuade Chinese. But just now I mentioned the situation is changing. Please notice the President Xi said, now young Chinese youngs can eye level with foreigner. But I said that many Chinese always think, oh, we talk about the USA, we can find with the USA and Western Europe, but it's not right. But I trust that this talking is always work with our lawful countries, including our African people, African friends. Even for now, my current nation, the current nation I stayed, but it's so-called is one of the best friend of China. But just for my personal experience, I can say I never trust so-called China, the friendship with China and the so-called one of a country. This is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. I think it is detailed enough, and I think we need to take that into consideration. I think this is true for all major international or global media news are loyalty to country first. It's just that we may have disparities in terms of values and priorities in terms of Africa. So in terms of maybe what we prioritize in terms of content and how we deliver it to foreign nations. So at this point, I will just want to give a hearty thanks to the panelists, to the organizers of the event. Special thanks to my friend Professor Eisenman and you, Professor Wang, for coming up with this idea and bringing this group of distinguished scholars together to give us their data and interpretation of the issues going on, and I hope this helps to advance our scholarly endeavors in the area of Chinese media in Africa. So at this juncture, I will hand the panel or the floor back to Professor Eisenman to continue with the program as we draw to a close. So thank you very much, and it was a pleasure having you in this panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mboya. That was fantastic hosting, and we're coming right up on that time where we're going to have 5 more. No, I'm only kidding. We are at the end of an excellent morning program, and I really want to thank the support of Shanghai International Studies University, the support of the University of Notre Dame, the administrators, and Professor Wang Duanyong, who again just blew me away with a fantastic data-driven presentation, as of course Professor Madrid Morales, fantastic stuff, and Professor McKay. I hope that you're there. Thank you again for joining us, and to thank all of our panelists. Professor Wang, would you like to step forward and say the last comments on our panel?
No. But Josh, but I guess today that we have to talk much more. But I guess you are the best the host. But you can have the concluding remark. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I don't actually have many concluding remarks, and I see it's about noon and we're all probably pretty hungry. So let me just say thank you to all of our audience for sticking with us from beginning to end. Thank you to all of our panelists. And I look forward to the next opportunity to work together between the University of Notre Dame and Shanghai International Studies University. We'll get these borders open and we're going to get this educational cooperation back online, get Professor Madrid Morales back into China for some great research, hopefully myself included. So thank everybody, especially Professor Mboya for his excellent moderation here in the final panel. So with all that, I'm going to go. Have a great day.
Bye.